Hey, BookTube. So, it is a new year, and a new year means trying to reconceptualize what your reading year is going to be like. Last year, I had the best reading year I think I've ever had, ever since I've been keeping track of my reading. So, about 5 or 6 years, give or take. And so, I figured I would do just a pile of possibilities. So, a possible TBR for this year. I just pulled off all the books that interest me from my shelf of books here, and I just want to show them to you, talk about why I'm considering reading them, and we'll see if I end up actually getting to them. But I know for a fact I will not get to all of them. That's just because I pulled off far too many books, and I only have so much reading time, and only have only so fast a reading speed, so that's gonna significantly limit my what I can and cannot read for this year. But first, we're gonna start off with a block of books all by the same author. We're gonna start off with Jonathan Haidt, a nonfiction author that I've been wanting to read for quite some time, and I want to go through his books somewhat in publication order. This is The Happiness Hypothesis, and it's finding modern truth in ancient wisdom. And basically what he tries to do in this book is take maxims of ancient wisdom, or truisms of ancient wisdom, and actually look to see if there's any kind of scientific evidence that we can find behind them. And so that's what it seems like he is doing. This book is one of his first ever book, and it came out in 2006. And it was directly based off of, or maybe it wasn't, but I know he's a psychologist of some kind. I don't know what kind of psychologist. Maybe it says here. He's a social psychologist. Okay, so he's a social psychologist, and I know his work has a lot to do with issues around morality and stuff, which directly leads to his next book, which is a book that I've been wanting to read forever. Like, this book I would have read last year if I could have fit it in. So this book is almost certainly a guarantee, regardless if I read the other books that I have by him. And that's The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It's Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. This is the nice hardcover that I actually found used. And it's him trying to conceptualize what that divide is between right and left, or conservative and liberal, and how I believe he makes the argument, or he tries to show how it's more dispositionally based. Like, if you are more conservative, you are going to consider things in a certain way. Like, maybe you be more risk averse or something like that. I'm not entirely sure how he goes about it. All I know that I've heard people talk about this book, and that it's fascinating when people do. They always find a lot of insight. I've even listened to podcasts and stuff of Jonathan Haidt talking about stuff from that book. So I know that it's going to be interesting to say, but whether or not he's an interesting writer is another question. And then we leave up my last the last physical book I have by him. It's the co-authored The Coddling of the Western Mind, or of the American Mind, sorry, The Coddling of the American Mind, by Jonathan Haidt, and then Greg Lukianov is his co-author here, who is the president of the organization called FIRE, which is like a free speech organization in America. And the subtitle here is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And they go through basically three great myths, or three great lies that people believe, or that younger people are buying into, and that are actually creating a coddling society that's harmful for the upcoming generation, which is technically my generation, because I believe that this book came out in 2018. It's very topical of the time of the 2010s, the late 2010s, and I don't remember what the three great myths are that they talk about. Oh, here we go. The Great Untruth of Fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. He thinks that's what people believe, or what younger people are believing. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And chapter 2, the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings. And then the great untruth number 3, uh, the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good and evil people. And then it goes around why these are destructive and how they contribute to anxiety and depression, which directly leads into his latest book, which came out, I think, 2 years ago already, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. So I have that as an ebook, but I don't know if I'll be reading that as part of this project or if I'll even do this project at all. I just know I have his books physically sitting on my TBR, and I know for a fact that I'll get to one of them, but I don't know if that'll drive me to read all of them. But I'm leaving that option open. And then directly related to that is another nonfiction work. It's by Sherry Turkle called Alone Together. This is the hardcover of her book. And the subtitle is Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And it's just a hardcover book that's exploring one book in a cottage industry of books that explore rising accounts of loneliness among younger people and how technology is facilitating that. And I believe, you could go to any bookstore, you'll find probably 30 books on this exact subject. It's very much a cottage industry in nonfiction circles for the past few years. But I hear that this author is particularly smart about this subject, when I know that a lot are probably not so much smart. They're more, trendy, very vacuous, empty books. But this one I hear is different from that. So we'll see how this book goes. I just want to see when this was published. Ooh, 2011. So maybe this one will be a lot smarter. I'm not sure. We'll see. And then we get to another nonfiction book. I'm going through nonfiction, but I have fiction here too, if that's your thing. I do have nonfiction, or fiction is my thing too, but I'm just going through the nonfiction first. And the next one, this one is a book I wanted to read last year as well, but I didn't. And it's Education's End by Anthony T. Kronman. And there's our author. But it's Why Colleges and Universities Have Given Up on the Meaning of Life. So kind of like a philosophical education type book. It's another older book too. I believe this book only came out in 2007-ish, I want to say. Yeah, I was right, 2007. So, a lot has changed since then, though whether or not our colleges and universities have gotten better is another question entirely. And then there's one thing that I want to try this year. And I have a few books that might actually fit this bill here, but I want to read a big fat work of either history or just nonfiction in general. Because last year I read most of my big books last year, I think actually all of my big books last year, were all fiction. They're all novels, or novel adjacent, like in the case of Tale of Genji. But this year I want to read at least one big meaty work of nonfiction, whether that is a history book or whatnot. And this is the number one candidate for that bill for this year. It's On Politics by Alan Ryan. This is a book that's been on my TBR for a long, long time. I've been wanting to read it for so long already. And it's a history of political thought from Herodotus to the present. And I just love this edition. The edition is beautifully floppy, very inviting. That cover is very appropriate and just wonderful, and I love the spine with the 3 dots there, and then, yeah, you got that image, what is that image? Cover design, mosaic depicting the School of Athens, Pompeii. So it's some kind of surviving artwork from Pompeii, depicting the School of Athens, which I believe was, Aristotle's school? Or was it Plato's school? Probably it was either one of those. But anyways, this is a 1,000-page book on the history of history of political thought, and I think these kinds of overviews are fascinating. I really do like them. I have a few overviews sort of like this, but nothing that is as beautiful as this. And I hear Alan Ryan is a good writer too, so that makes a difference. And then here are some of my other contentions for a big thick book for 2026, nonfiction book. This one is a bit deceiving, but it's The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, the divided brain in the making of the Western world. And he tries to make an argument about the human brain, about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and he tries to use extensive research, but then also like philosophical thinking to try to analyze this. Drawing on a vast body of experimental research, he argues that while our left brain makes for a wonderful servant, it is a very poor master. As he shows, it is the right side which is more reliable and insightful. Without it, our world would be very mechanistic, stripped of depth, color, and value. So it's more like using the left and the right side of the brain to explore different kinds of values. I'm not entirely sure how convinced I'd be of that, but it sounds fascinating all the same. So trying to use kind of like a scientific or neurological approach to philosophical ideas in our contemporary world. So, and the reason why I say this is a bit deceptive is because I believe the book is not even 500 pages long. It's 462 pages long, but because all the rest here are notes and a bibliography, back when books were expected to have bibliographies. But yeah, so that's this book, but it's also, the print is also fairly small, so I think you could bump this up to at least 600 pages. And maybe the content will be fairly in-depth too. And then the last nonfiction book that would fit the bill for a big, thick nonfiction work this year is, I'm just trying to see how many pages it is. 718, but it's a book by Roy Porter, The Greatest Benefit to Mankind, A Medical History of Humanity. And you can see it's a bit of a beefy book. It's just over 700 pages of medical history. And I'm one of those, I love history, and I love just any kind of history of. I've talked about this before. You put the history of and then whatever you put in that word, history of philosophy, history of medicine, history of science, history of I don't know, just general history or history of historical thinking. Anything like that really does, or history of philosophy, anything like that really does interest me, and the history of medicine is one of those areas that interest me. Reading a contemporary work of medicine or anything like that would be far less interesting to me. I just love learning about how history flailed along throughout the 3,000 years that we have of documented medical history, and how only comparatively recently, like in the last 150 years, how medicine radically, drastically, like transformative, like seismic shifts within medicine itself. How, like someone like, who is it? Hippocrates, with the Hippocratic Oath, how he was like him and he was like the main idea of influence behind medical thought for well until the late medieval period. After that, maybe. So I don't know. It's a fascinating history, something that when you read, you really learn to not take what we currently have for granted. Like our medical system, like we can always complain about whatever your country's medical system is like and how it could always be better, and there's a lot of truth to that, but just learning how vastly different and how vastly improved your medical system is in whatever country you're in compared to 50 to 100 to 150, 200 years ago, it makes you, you can't help but be grateful for the advances in medical science. And the next book here is directly on that same topic. It's a brief history of medicine. Here, it's not one of those thick books. This book only clocks in at just under 400 pages, but it's by Paul Strathern, who usually writes about Renaissance Italy, but this is his history, brief history of medicine here. So this is another topic, and then I also have I don't have the physical copy here, but there's another book on the history of pain or something like that, and I can't recall the title or the author, so I'm not being very helpful here. But that book would be another sort of medical history that I would be interested in if I made this a project, a history of medicine. Before I get into that, I'm gonna here's 3 more just general nonfiction books, including a contemporary classic, or not contemporary classic, but a modern classic history book. But here's not just a regular nonfiction book that I want to read. It's The Rebel Cell by Joseph Heath and Andrew Potter, and this is the subtitle here is Why the Culture Can't Be Jammed, and the whole idea here is that you have this wave of resistance to kind of like consumerism to a corporate controlled world, and this book here says Joseph Heath and Andrew Potter argue that this countercultural opposition to the quote-unquote the system has not only been unproductive, but also helped to create the very consumer society that radicals oppose. And you get a hint of that here on the cover here, where you got this, I can't remember what the photo is, G. Guevara, yeah, but he's like a socialist figure who's very popular among young socialists, and there's like T-shirts and all kinds of memorabilia with this guy's face on it, from what he stands for. But you have it on a coffee cup, a disposable coffee cup, which is one of the distinctive icons of mass consumer cultures. So you got very much a contrasting image here, and I really like that. I really like books like this that try to subvert how things are. Like, you make your whole identity being one that's anti-capitalist, but really, how anti-capitalist are you, and how much do you take for granted about the capitalist system that you really couldn't do without? So this kind of book is something that seriously gets the wheels turning in my brain. And then another book is by a familiar author. I read a book of his last year, and I made it onto my top 10 books that I read that year. It's Tom Nichols, and this is his Our Own Worst Enemy, and the subtitle here is The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. And normally I wouldn't be interested in this kind of political commentary, contemporary debate book, because there's so many of these that are being published, and so many of them that I imagine are very empty and performative, and are just looking for their, bestseller and paycheck, and maybe an article in the New York Times Book Review, and then they pass out of the public conscious, and then that's it. But this book here, I've read this author's previous book, which was The Death of Expertise. I read the first edition. He has a second edition that recently came out, which I might one day would like to read, but this was his sequel in 2021, I believe. 2021? Yeah, 2021. So this was his sequel to that book. And since he's a terrific writer and a terrific thinker, I think this book will be actually pretty good. It's seems like to him, I read the short introduction that he has in this book, and it seemed like to him that when he was researching and writing The Death of Expertise, he stumbled upon a deeper, something deeper that he wanted to write about, that only was adjacently touched in The Death of Expertise. So he thinks that The Death of Expertise is like a smaller phenomenon in this greater issue, and I think this is what this book is talking about. This book is going to be diving deeper into that greater issue that he stumbled upon while going about researching and writing his previous book. So we'll see how this is. This is almost certainly a book that I see myself reading this year, because I did enjoy his other books so much. And then we get to the modern classic, and this is a modern classic that was probably on last year's list. I believe I made a list like this last year, and T.H. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom was definitely on that, or it's T.E. Lawrence, sorry, not T.H. T.E. Lawrence, Seven Pillars of Wisdom. And it's his nonfiction account, basically like an epic memoir sort of account of his role in the Arab revolt against the Turks in the First World War, which is only like a footnote of that actual war itself, but because T.E. Lawrence is such a good writer and wrote such a memorable account, that this book is a modern classic. And I love that cover too. Like, look at that. That's one of the main reasons why I still keep this edition, because I actually have a Folio Society edition that I found. But this will be my reading copy, and then that Folio Society edition will be like my my bookshelf copy, not a performative one, one that will just stand there and be beautiful, because I do see myself reading it, but that'll be the copy that I think that I'll go back to, and when I reread this, which I certainly will, I imagine, because I've read the opening on this channel before, like the first page or so, and it is one of the most breathless and enthralling openings that I've ever read, and so that's why it's completely ridiculous that I've never actually read this thing from front to back. And this book actually could fit in that chunkster list for nonfiction, because it is almost 700 pages. It's about 683, so this is a book that'll be read this year, almost certainly. And then, if you remember, we move on to a bit of a different theme. If you remember some of my previous videos, especially at the beginning of last year, I've been working through a Western canon reading list. It's been very slow, snail-paced, and last year I didn't read that many works from the Western canon list, but I read a few significant ones. Like I read 4 books by Aristotle. I read all the major tragedians, so around 22 plays. I read all of Aeschylus. I believe I read almost all of Sophocles, and I read a large chunk of Euripides, though I didn't read all. I think I maybe read just over half of the surviving plays by Euripides. And then I also read about half the plays, existing plays that we have of Aristophanes, the old comedy writer. And so what I could read this year is continue with that and read this other volume of Aristophanes that I did not read. I wanted to read this one last year, but I don't know. Reading the Western canon is something I've always dreamed of doing, but I just don't seem to have a lot of enthusiasm for it these days, and I might make a separate video on that just to talk about it. But this is the Penguin Classic of the Wasps, the Poet and the Women, and the Frogs. So 3 plays by Aristophanes. I do have another volume up on my bookshelf where I would probably read the edition of Birds that's in there, because none of my Penguin Classics include that one. So by the time I'm done, I would have read 7 plays by Aristophanes, which is not everything of his, I believe, but I'm not really all that concerned about being a completist at this point. But I haven't really enjoyed what I've been reading from the Western canon, and maybe that's because I've got the air of, like, this is a chore that I'm forcing myself to do. But the thing is, once I've read them, I appreciate that I've read them, even if I didn't necessarily enjoy them. So I'm very conflicted, because if I do continue, this would be something that I read this year, and I would also get to the Essential Epicurious, which is a very slim volume. This one would be very easy to read. There's not a whole lot of good anthologies of Epicurious that I've at least found online, A lot of them usually are just people writing about Epicurus. So this is the best I could find, I think. And then I would be reading The Voyage of the Argo by Apollonius of Rhodes, The Voyage of the Argo. And then I'd move into Xenophon, and I have an ebook of his Xenophon's Hellenica, which is his continuation of the Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. But he finishes the war, but then he also moves on beyond that. Though the historicity of, or the reliability of Xenophon is a lot more in question than, say, of someone like Thucydides. But then I also have recently purchased the landmark Xenophon's Anabasis, which is his most famous work, I believe, because it's like an ancient adventure tale of Xenophon from his own first-person perspective. He was part of a group of Spartans who assisted one of the descendants of the Persian throne. I think it was Cyprus is his name. Yeah. So Xenophon, the Persian prince Cyrus the Younger, is marshaling an army to usurp the throne of his brother Artaxerxes the king, and around 10,000 Spartans are sent to help him out because previously the Persians had lent their support to Sparta in the war against Athens in the Peloponnesian War, and so they're kind of repaying the favor here. But then Cyprus loses, he's killed, and then you have a bunch of Spartans who are thick in the Middle East, far away from home, trying to somehow get back to their home without getting killed because they're in direct hostile territory all around them. And this is their account of, or this is Xenophon's account of helping them get back. And this is in the beautiful Landmark edition, where it's just filled with notes and maps and illustrations. You can see there's a map there, illustration there. But the maps are specifically made for this volume, where it'll, every 10 to 15 pages, I believe, they will get, or maybe not quite that much, but they will give you specific detailed maps about how we can reconstruct the actual area of where some of the action is taking place. So you're never lost when you're reading this volume. And then it's just got, as you can tell, if I just open randomly, you got all the kinds of notes at the bottom there and on the side, and it's just a beautiful, comprehensive volume. Very expensive. This book is, in Canadian dollars, it's almost $70, but and I was glad to get this book because this came out in like 2021, and then they only did a first printing of this hardcover, and it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later, they still haven't printed out a paperback of this, but they came out with a second printing of the hardcover, and that's what I have here. So they finally put this back in print, and I immediately snapped it up. It helped that I had gift cards, so I didn't pay the full price for this. But it's a beautiful volume, and it's a volume I'm almost guaranteed to be reading this year, I think. Almost guaranteed. So I'm maybe saying about 75% guaranteed, because I do want to sink my teeth into this. Also because the great thing about this volume is that it includes tons of appendices. So if I go all the way to the end of Xenophon here, somewhere around here, where all of this here is appendices, giving historical context about all the different stuff that you might encounter while reading Xenophon, and then we actually get the new translation and the notes and everything here. So definitely a volume to have, and one I'm quite excited to actually read. So that is a major possibility. And then that leads directly into, if I continue with the Western canon, what would be the next period. The next period is works of Alexander the Great. And the great account of that is the campaigns of Alexander, or the usual account is the campaigns of Alexander by Arrian. This is not strictly chronological, or at least my Western canon list would not be strictly chronological, because Arrian writes much later. He writes, when does he write? I can't quite remember when he writes, but he writes a good 300, 400 years after Alexander the Great actually lived. But he writes this account using sources that we no longer have that existed, or that no longer exist. So this is an invaluable account of the history and campaigns of Alexander the Great. And so this would the other landmark edition that I would be very much interested in reading this year. And then adjacent to that, I would be reading, I have a volume of Demosthenes, I believe I'm saying that right, I'm probably not, of the Greek order, during the time of King Philip and later King Alexander, when the kingdom of Macedon was taking over the Greek world, and then moved over onto taking over Persia. So I have the Oxford World Classics edition that I just forgot to pull down from my bookcase. It's literally sitting right over there. So that is a volume that I might read this year too. And then another Alexander the Great account would be, this is a Penguin Classic of the Greek Alexander Romance, which is an unattributed volume of some of the myths that accumulated around Alexander the Great that were put into a book like this, the Greek Alexander the Great, and then was circulating all around late antiquity, I believe. And so it's, or maybe that's when it first popped up, as late antiquity. All these different myths that are now usually put in biographies of Alexander the Great, like him taming his horse, and all different stories along his adventures. It's a short work, translated by Richard Stoneman. But yeah, it's an influential book that has really shaped how we've seen Alexander ever since, through the eyes of mythology from hundreds of years later. And I think this is a really neat book to have, and one that I would like to read. And so if I do end up reading a lot of that direct history, I would like to, or those direct historical accounts, I'd like to continue with actually reading Greek history. So I have a short book here, Ancient Greece by Thomas R. Martin, from prehistoric to Hellenistic times. Hellenistic would be post-Alexander the Great, after he died in his kingdom, or whatever you want to call it, his empire divided. And then he just got this short account. It's like 200 pages, and it's got lots of illustrations in it all around. So I think this would be a neat little primer on ancient history, or on ancient Greek history, because I'm fairly well versed in the basics of ancient Greek history. I've done a lot of reading and studying on the topic, almost inadvertently, not because it's of direct special interest to me. And then I'll just continue that with this book here, The Daily Life of the Ancient Greeks, by Robert Garland. And it's a wider book. If I can measure it here, as you can see, yeah, it's all much wider, but it's also only like 200 pages, if that. It's around 200 pages. So this one I'm more excited to read, because it is actually talking about daily life. So what was their private life like? What was their household routines? What was the education like, and what kinds of education were available? What was their leisure-like time? How did they relate to other people? What were like weddings like? What were I don't know, how did they treat their slaves, and what was slave culture like, because their idea of slavery was quite different from what we normally think of when we think of slavery. We usually think of, the antebellum South in America as the system of slavery, but the slavery in the ancient world was of a very particular kind. It was certainly different. So that's what this kind of book would be exploring. I'm getting very windy here, so I wonder if I should maybe stop and then just continue with my fiction books in a different video. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say this is my nonfiction potential TBR for 2026, and then I'm going to do a separate video on the fiction books for as a potential TBR for 2026. So I'm going to leave it there, BookTube. Let me know if you'd want me to do this with ebooks too, because I certainly could. I'm going to be reading a lot of ebooks this year, and I know I read a lot of ebooks last year, so I think over half of my reading last year was ebooks. So let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.